Okay, everyone. So today we'll be going over Recitation 7. I put the link in here of um, the material slides link. Feel free to visit this link to see them. It'll also have the slides for the rest of the semester, so it might become more relevant in the future. But I'll try to do my best to talk over what we missed last recitation and also Vanner Heiden's new material. So we left off with tRNA structures. So I hope you guys can review that in the last recitation. So I just put it in this slides just so you guys can have access to it so without having to flip between pages. So tRNA charging, tRNA synthesis, how it checks for the correct amino acid, how codons are checked, and an introduction to translation. So we're left off now here with initiation. So initiation is a process that requires multiple enzymes. This process in general involves multiple steps. And so I will try to cover that as clear as possible, and I'll try to generalize it as possible. So first thing, let me share the PowerPoint. So this is the Recitation 7 slides. I'll post it as well. And this is the link to it. So I hope that you guys are watching this also while annotating the PDF. So to start, we have in our pocket fragments of the ribosome and the mRNA at hand. So the first thing that happens is we need to prepare the 30S subunit. So I will call this the 30S RNA preparation. And the way it works is IF1 and IF3 will bind to the 30S subunit. IF3 binds in there at a different site. IF1 binds to the A site. We don't, the reason this happens is one, IF1 will basically guide the mRNA to the 30S subunit. Secondly, the IF1 blocks the A site. That way tRNAs don't come in when they're not yet supposed to go there. So that's the first step. Prepare the 30S RNA and mRNA recruitment. The next step is preparation of the first amino acid. So FMET preparation. So FMET tRNA available. Hopefully you can review the last slides to talk about how this happens. So this FMET tRNA will bind to IF2 GTP. And one thing to notice is a pattern. When something is GTP bound, it always does something that will make it GDP bound. So we're just going to talk about any kind of GTPase like that from now. So IF2 GTP binds to FMET, and as a result, after that binding, it now brings it to this newly made complex that we have. And so that guides this FMET tRNA IF2 to the proper place in the start codon, AUG. And this is stabilized by both IF2 fitting nicely and also UAC perfectly hydrogen bonding with AUG. So that's the first step. That's the next step. So basically, the next one is FMET binding to initiation complex. Then after that, once this complex is done, the 50S subunit finally has the right affinity to bind. And so the next thing is 50S subunit binds. It can only bind when these proteins are at hand. And the idea is that if it binds too early, then this amino acid cannot get in. If it binds to if it binds without these, then maybe it's not going to be a perfect fit. So only after these three proteins are there will it bind. Now comes the GTPa's job. IF2 becomes IF2 GDP. And when this process happens, the result is IF departure, IF's depart. And what you're left with is now the perfectly initiated ribosome. So in this case, the purpose of the GTP-GDP is to power this conformational change to get rid of everyone. One potential way to ask a question on this in the exam is, if I mutate IF2 such that it can no longer hydrolyze GTP, what would happen? In this case, what could happen is the GTP won't hydrolyze, the IFs won't leave, and so this ribosome is stuck in an initiation complex. When we're thinking about the cost of this process, the only part that uses a triphosphate is IF2. Every time it recruits an FMET, it needs to be in GTP bound. So initiation cost, 1 GTP per protein. Pretty simple. If you had a difficulty remembering those steps, I would highly recommend you kind of read this text and look at the diagram, or rewind my audio. Okay, then the next step. Let me clear. Elongation is a much more complicated process, but we'll try to go over it. So the first thing is you need to recruit the next amino acid. So in this case, we enter the tRNA amino acid. This will be bound to EFTU. EFTU is now our next GTP protein. So EFTU is an escort. It's kind of like IF, the IF from last page. So in this case, it's kind of like IF2, but in this case, it's EFTU. So EFTU binds to the next amino acid tRNA and escorts it to the ribosome. And remember, it's a GTP bound. So the moment it binds to the correct spot, it hydrolyzes, and that way it comes off. That way EFTU doesn't get stuck here. So EFTU escorts it to the ribosome, and once it's a perfect fit, it will hydrolyze GTP and come off. So that's why EFTU comes off in this step. So you can think of the ribosome having a perfect fit at this site as acting like a gap. It encourages the hydrolysis of this GTP. So this is only hydrolyzed when this perfectly fits here. How do we know it perfectly fits? If the codons of the mRNA match well with the anticodons of the tRNA. Then you're left with this state, 2 tRNAs. How do we bring them together? The way it works is the amine group of the new tRNA attacks the C terminus of the P site amino acid. So here I put the electron pushing diagram as well. And so the result of that is this bond between the P site amino acid and the tRNA will break. And then now you're left off with these two. And so as a result, this P site tRNA will now be amino acid free, and the A site amino acid will now have a new part bound to it. And what I want you to notice is, if this is my first amino acid, and this is my second amino acid, this is how they look like after they come together. And the first amino acid always has the N amine group at the end, which tells you that this is going to be the N terminus. So this confirms our idea that amino acids are added to the C terminus whenever you translate. I put in the next page a much more detailed electron pushing diagram if that is much more clearer to you. But essentially, remember, amine group of the new amino acid attacks the old peptide's C terminus to allow the old peptide to become part of the new amino acid, the new tRNA. Now you're left with an empty tRNA and a newly multi-peptide bound tRNA, and we want to move that and scooch that to the next site. Remember, A site is entry of tRNA, P site has the peptide, E is exit. We want to scooch everybody one to the next one, and so as a result, we need something to kick it, and that is a process that requires energy. And so to do that, there is this protein called EFG, which we don't show here, but basically what it does is it acts like a boot that just comes in here and kicks them one slot to the left. And so this EFG will then shift this empty one to the E site. It will shift the peptide one to the P site and leave the A site empty. This process requires GTP, and it will only hydrolyze once it can do the kick. And so we've now done two things. Or three things. We've delivered the next amino acid, we've made the new peptide bond, and we've shifted down everybody to the next appropriate site. So cost. So the first thing is EFTU GTP uses a GTP. So that's one thing. The next thing is EFG causes you to consume a GTP. And so as a result, every time you add a amino acid, you consume 2 GTP. So that's our mathematical accounting for that. One other thing that you might need to remember for proteins is the thing that the protein that replenishes EFTU GTP. So when EFTU GDP comes off after delivering its job, it needs to become EFTU GTP once again. And so to do that, EFTS acts as a GEF to remove the old GDP and put in the new GTP. So that's all you need to know for EFTS. Okay, long, complicated process, but just remember the highlight of, sorry, I guess that doesn't work. The highlight of this process is EFTU, EFG, and EFTS. Termination is a much more straightforward process. It requires RF1. So in this case, initiation factor, IF, elongation factors, EF. For ending, release factors, RF. So the first thing is, you're at the end of translation, you're going to be left off with this. You have a very long sequence of proteins. Very long sequence of proteins to your P site, and then a an empty stop codon at the A site. And we know no tRNAs recognize this. The reason why also is that there are other things that recognize the stop codon. In this case, it's RF1 and RF2. This is what RF1 recognizes. This is what RF2 recognizes. And so as a result, they will bind to the stop codon. So that's the first part. The next part, so I guess if I were to do the annotations again, RFs, RF12 binds to stop codon. The next thing is RF1 and 2, when they're in that perfect fit, it induces RF1 and 2 leads to conformational change, which is usually how we explain things that we don't know how to explain. And that leads to ester hydrolysis. So the bond between this tRNA and this peptide is broken. And so as a result, you now have a free peptide and a leftover tRNA.